Okay, this is one of the messiest lectures you'd ever see. I am not trying to lecture, but I'm trying to share a little bit more of myself on how I actually think, how I seek to understand, or basically just positively ruminate of some sort. This is what I wrote on November 20, 2025. I was listening to Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He does have 12 books of his personal journal, of which they were able to retrieve. On those 12 books, Marcus Aurelius talks about life in the most authentic form, how to approach life, how to deal with life, whether wins or successes. I personally have read these books about either 1 to 2 years ago, and for some reason I have been reading it or listening to it again, and the impact is so different. And I wanted to share a couple of concepts which came out in his reading. He did mention either in book 4, 5, or 6 to turn away from sophism. And I wanted he talked about turning away from sophism and Cesarism. And I used Grok basically to come up with conclusions to understand that. I also think I searched with Google. So the first question that comes to mind is, what is Sophism? Quote unquote, according to Grok, it was considered the wise ones or experts. This was referring to a movement, style of thinking, or set of practices in ancient Greek philosophy around 5 BCE or 5th century from itinerant intellectuals and teachers. These teachers basically got paid a fee that they would kind of coach elites on how to answer, how to debate. So I wanted to take you down the rabbit hole of what sophism really is and some arguments as to why it can be questionable, and why Marcus Aurelius did talk in his book as to reject both sophism and Cesarism. Along with my research about these two concepts, I did write creative versus non-creative thoughts. As to why I did write that, I don't know. So according to Grok AI's conclusion of sophism, it does talk about being plausible but fallacious. So yes, to my understanding of those concepts, you do make an argument, but the fallaciousness or erroneous, basically, you have an argument, but it's not really an argument. And the arguments can be used for deception or to just display intellectual ingenuity. Sophist was, if to be translated in Greek, it is quote unquote wise. And this was basically a concept emphasized by Greek teachers in full understanding or accepting of relativism, of which is the belief that truth is subjective over absolute objective truth. So that's not a comma there. Let me repeat. Relativism is the belief that truth is subjective over absolute objective truth. And basically, I'm going to circle that is because I feel like in 2026, with AI coming out, we have fully been understanding truth being a subjective matter. And why I do reject that, even if I've lied to myself, believed the lies, traumatized, whatever that is that for some deep reason, I believe truth is objective. And yes, it can be a subjective experience, but truth is an absolute and objective truth. However, when you do understand or fully accept relativism as an absolute truth, it basically spins off to using sophism as your way of argument. And so let's just go down. He does talk about these three philosophers or sophists: Protagoras, Gorgias, and Prodeus. I have not read their writing, but I will try to read some of their arguments on this. So it talks about sophism basically subordinates truth seeking to the focus of winning persuasion, personal advantage, and appearances. And when I look at a lot of spirituality, philosophy, coaching, podcasting, what exactly is the intent here? Are we trying to win, persuade, personal advantage to make businesses, or to like showcase appearances? I think I'm making a connection on the actuality or the relevance of Sophism in 2026. And so basically it talks about I don't know, I put a word why here. So basically why perhaps Sophism is not good, or why do people use Sophism? So it does say why Sophism is negative. Let's just go with that. Because it rejects, or it's the rejection or downgrading of objective truth. There is a quote that I read, at least an explanation of this, that says, if nothing is more true, more than anything else, why debate? And that just goes down to relativism. If everything is subjective, then why are we debating? And it also prioritizes persuasion, victory over truth. It still goes down to the goals of Sophism, where the arguments are basically profit-minded, because you have to win, you have to persuade, you have to have a personal advantage, and it is for appearance. So why is it more of a negative stance on explanations is because of that. So it talks about rhetoric. So weak argument appears stronger. If you can persuade a weak argument and let people, or at least power, believe it, then it's basically rhetoric. So it would focus more on the position versus what is correct. And Plato actually called it flattery. It gives people what they want to hear, not what is good for them. So, and they're deliberate fallacies. Because I think one of the biggest thing that comes to my mind when I'm talking about this is that it's very profit oriented. There is a goal, a desire to be on top. It's not seeking exactly what is. Then it also talks about intellectual dishonesty, equivocation. Basically, just during an argument, you're going to be shifting the meanings of words. And I think in 2026, we've been doing a lot of that. We've been having a lot of ambiguity and wordplay and misleading analogies. We also ignore context or counter evidences. And intellectual charlatanism, moral unscrupulousness. Sophists, success is the goal. And basically, I try to rewrite that, and it was basically just on the intellectual dishonesty. So again, why is Sophism not healthy or negative? Why doesn't it benefit the common good? Because it does reject objective truth. It prioritizes persuasion, victory over truth. It is intellectual dishonesty, and it has moral unscrupulousness, where success, profit, position is always the goal here. Going back to how Sophism subordinates truth-seeking, again, it's focused on winning, persuasion, personal advantage, and appearances. So back in Greece, when they were teaching, at least when the sophist teachers were teaching their students, they were taught to argue either side of arguments, even if it was not for the just causes, just for the sake of it. And basically, Plato basically call this erosion of virtue, and justice becomes whatever the powerful or majority cause persuaded to accept. And I wanted to kind of make a clear distinction of the difference between philosophy versus Sophism, because I feel like even those words, philosophy, a lot of us are listening to podcasts, and I think we do have to have great conversations, and all of us carry our own philosophy, but I wanted to bring light and see if there is a big difference if we are caught under sophism, or if we are truly true philosophers. So philosophy, what is philosophy? I think it is focused on what is good, what is true, what is real. I remember listening to either Brene Brown in her talk, if it cannot be measured, then it's not real, right? So if it can't be measured, it's not real. The attitude of philosophy is understanding that there is objective truth worth pursuing. So I think in the Roman courts, a lot of people growing in those days, well, of course, there were the people who were fighting in the gladiators, but a lot of the citizens back then did pick up a science or an art. So if they would pick up music, but they would also pick up philosophy or the study of some type of science. And I think that was one way that they could balance their minds and not fall into the pits of sophism, which is just wise intellectual arguments. And I really, really value that. But at the end of the day, we're going to talk about Cesarism, which still falls under the rule of Caesar. And that's another concept because I'm already at 11 minutes. So going back to philosophy, what is good, what is true, what is real? The attitude of objective truth as to making sure there is a measurement to it. There are senses to it. And the role of rhetoric, it's a tool, instinct of truth. So basically, rhetoric, right? Rhetoric. That basically happens, but it would be a tool for the instinct of truth in service. Sorry, that's service. So rhetoric won't be erroneous. It would just be in service of truth. And the moral stance of philosophy is wisdom and virtue, even if unpopular. So it talks about seemingly, which is sophism. So it's all assumption, purely subjective, versus being, which is philosophy. And going to the comparison again, where if and so our focus is on winning or profit, then it would fall under sophism. And if our focus is knowing, understanding, then that would be philosophy. In searching basically some concepts of sophism, it talks about Pollock rhetoric, stinking skunk argument. It's basically when you throw a stinking skunk at something and people don't believe it just because of that negative argument. And I don't know how it's used, but it's like, who the hell thought of that word? I've never heard of that word before. So what's the relevance of this? I have spent a good chunk of my years trying to understand so many things. I have probably been I've been following sophism unconsciously for quite some time now. What really, really impacted me was this moving place to place and aimless drifting. When I look at the patterns of my lifestyle, I have moved multiple places, and I haven't really fully understood those concepts. I think early as a kid, I tried to understand my environment so much that probably I just don't want to commit. But aside from those two things that fall under sophism, at least the teachers of them, a big portion of my life too was dedicated to find answers. No matter how hard it was, I always wanted to answer the question why. The relevance of why I'm talking about this is that I've been reading a lot of old authors, Khalil Gibran, Marcus Aurelius. I've read some Carl Jung, Freud, Adler, all of these like high thinking people, and we're not talking about the writings anymore. Not that we should or shouldn't. It's just that I feel like a lot of our literary, at least our literary foundations, if not the Bible, which honestly has more of a moral grounding compared to all these other literary authors, because of first how it stood the test of time, but also because of the arguments that it has. And what I'm trying to point out here is, as you try to seek the understanding of the world and the universe, we do have to make a distinct value statement or a distinct conclusion of what we are really trying to do here. Are you trying to win? Are you trying to persuade people? Are you trying to do this for personal advantage or monetization of your thoughts? Or is this for pure appearances, so you can appear witty or wise? Then that would still be considered sophism, which is still an actuality and a style of thinking. But are we trying to really, really come back to philosophy, the unending search of what is true, good, and real? Are we trying to pursue objective truth here, or are we just persuading to be on top, to be on profit? And I hope this 16-minute video gave some perspective, because I personally feel like it was kind of all over the place. But I hope the goal of this talk was to make a conclusion and a comparison of sophism and philosophy. And the next video I write would hopefully be on Cesarism.